Aberrant. Story, Daily Equestria Life with Monster Girl. By St. The two middle-aged unicorn stallions who currently occupied the revived post of royal physician, one diagnostician, one surgeon, both effectively married to each other in all ways but the legal and sexual, had discovered the job came with a few unusual requirements. They both had to be extremely good at keeping secrets. Not only did having any understanding of alicorn biology and worse, origins, place their own conjectures into classified files, but rumors of alicorn colds tended to lead into major stock market dips. When dealing with the medical needs of a species which numbered in the single digits, a certain degree of desperate improvisation was frequently essential. It helped if you weren't easily startled, and both of them were now almost used to the thunder which announced the younger's displeasure with the most recent procedure. And on the whole, you had to be ready for anything, but when managing the health of the elder, anything had required proper equipment. This had led to the creation of a singular examination table, one which had been designed to accommodate a form of that sheer size. It did a lot to make the elder just a little more comfortable, which was already essential for somebody who had both an effective phobia regarding needles and a way to melt them while negating the need to shove a lot of smaller tables together. It also effectively negated the need for preying onto sun that no sudden shifts in body weight would lead to that large body tumbling into a sudden gap, and did so after it had already happened. There were 4 ponies in the highly secured offices within the lunar wing, and they were standing next to examination tables which had been shoved together, the one meant for the elder, and that typically used by the younger. There had been no other choice. The unresponsive patient was too large for a standard table, and when it came to overflowing that which was used by the elder, torsos weren't supposed to bend that way. The doctors had called the siblings in. They could do that, when it was a medical matter. They were the only 2 ponies in the nation who had the authority to make those mares follow certain categories of order, and it usually didn't keep the diagnostician from sleeping for more than 1 night in 5. And they had been conducting the briefing while speaking in what nearly amounted to normal tones, at least after the terror had been subtracted out. And we have no starting point, the surgeon groaned. Muscular for a unicorn, with a warm brown coat and shaved away mane. We went through the Canterlot archives, princesses, and when it comes to centaur medicine, the only solid thing we found was suggestions for treating any wounds they inflicted. The anatomical charts are open guesswork, a soft snort, the thick black tail twitched, and based on our examination of her, somebody was making some lousy guesses. Nothing at all, the elder quietly said. Not even in the oldest part of the stacks? There's actually more in the newest, the diagnostician sighed. White, thin, with a mane which just about outmassed the rest of him. I fail to understand, the younger frowned. Why would there be recent publications? They are self-help books. The sudden flare of anger made the diagnostician sound slightly less like a mare. Your magic is back and so are you. Helping ponies deal with the trauma of tire wreck. Mostly through repeating the same useless things which have been in self-help books for generations and adding the word tire wreck a few dozen times. Crisis response through instant book sales, princess. And they do nothing. I read through 7 of them and the only thing they made me think about was. He abruptly stopped as his head went up, and slightly to the right. The other 3, with well-practiced ease, ignored it. The surgeon took over. We've examined her as closely as we can, all the spells and devices we could utilize. Princesses, there are ways in which we could usually try to treat any mammal, just because mammals share some basic arrangements, the location of vital arteries, the placement of certain organs. But with her, some of the organs are in new locations, and we've verified at least 1 set of duplicates. And that's not even getting into her digestive system. Is there something wrong there as well? The younger inquired. It's functional, the surgeon helplessly declared. It's just stretched. The diagnostician's head came back down. But why would reparations need to apply 6 generations later? They initially ignored that too, although there would eventually be a lively debate over just what the actual fantasy had been. Princesses, this is what it comes down to. There are certain procedures which apply to everything living, like cleaning and dressing the wounds. We've done that. A very few medicines will work on any mammal, at least once the dosage is adjusted for body mass. That potentially gives us a painkiller for her. Mikhanga, the elder softly guessed. The smaller stallion nodded. That's what we'll try. But she could have a bad reaction, princess, because Noppanee's ever treated a centaur with it before. It could kill her. Any potion or drug we use could be fatal. And universal status doesn't help us with the infection, the surgeon grimly stated, because there are no antibiotics which are that broad spectrum. We can try the ones which work on the most species and hope, but if we're wrong, we could damage some of her organs. Organs we don't know how to treat. One crisis might kill her. She's resilient, the diagnostician told them. Exceptionally so, we've already seen that in the tests. If we can break the infection, the rest should heal on its own. But without that. The younger looked to the elder, who silently nodded. Then the infection, the younger told the physicians, shall be burned out. They stared at her. The dual capacity for doing so wasn't quite a job requirement, but it wasn't far off either. Princess, the surgeon tried, it's already gone into the body, you can see some of the red streaks along the arms. And she has them in other places. The monster had been put back into the remnants of its clothing before the siblings had arrived, although the Stolians weren't certain whose dignity they were trying to protect. If it was just on the surface, we could, he swallowed, try flame. The burn scars would be better than letting the infection run free. But it's too far along for that, too far for even another gulp. Amputation. Her own fever isn't enough to stop it, and raising her body temperature enough to kill the infection would also kill her. We can't generate a heat where the radiance is directed so precisely as to harm nothing except the infection. But that was when the elder stepped forward. The white head dipped towards the monster's body. A corona of sunlight danced around the horn. Doctor's bear, the elder quietly said, let us show you a little trick. The filly's prison exists within a gap in the world. Such vacuums take some effort to arrange. There are times when land has to be purchased, and that has actually become easier. Modern technology means such things can be done without requiring buyer and seller to be on the same continent, let alone within one room. But human advancement makes other aspects harder. Satellites can only be rerouted so many times, and the fear that someone will spot the code which tells the lens to not record a given location. It used to be easier. Humans were more respectful of ownership, or at least easier to scare off when the borders had been breached. They ran, and all they carried back were stories, things which could be dismissed as the ravings of a drunk who'd read too many stories as a child. Every border guard carried a flask, and when you caught up to fallen quarry, you left them smelling that much worse for both wear and credibility. But there have been cameras for decades now. Some of the fee among the liminals got caught that way, and so many strings had to be pulled in order to falsely make the entire thing appear in the history books as a hoax. The filly is 8, and she knows all about cameras. She's been taught to avoid them at all costs, and years from now, when somebody enters her shared household under the lie of filming a documentary, she will not be the first to suspect so much as the first to fear. Cameras are a threat. Still images are bad, moving ones are worse. She is 8, and the herd talks in hushed tones about digital cameras. Images which are easy to fake, becoming easier with every passing year, and perhaps that will give them some protection. Making something come across as a hoax is simpler than ever. But the hidden communities around the world have to keep doing it. They feel as if they are forever one sighting away from being exposed. Worse, one capture. The herd exists within a gap in the world, for few recognize how large France truly is. Land can be acquired, was purchased centuries ago, and humans stayed away. Mostly away. There is a time every year when humans are brought into the gap, and they must always be made to forget. The filly doesn't know about that yet, just that a night exists where every child is put to bed early, with none knowing why. The herd has a forest and some clearings, space enough to farm, room aplenty for schools and contests and games of all sorts. There's also a cemetery. That takes up a lot of room. The filly's mother wants her to participate in every game, sometimes comes close to outright shoving her in because the filly's mother is among the strongest and therefore the filly had better put on a good showing. The herd expects that of the filly, her mother expects that and, her mother pushes the filly forward, always expecting more of her. Pushes in strange ways, as if simultaneously insisting that the filly must take part while, and the filly only sees this in rare glimpses. When the racecourse passes that part of the segregated stands and she gets a glimpse of her mother's face, still being afraid of what could happen when she does. Her mother pushes too hard sometimes and so the filly often feels that there's no fun in the games, just an unrelenting drive insisting that the filly must succeed, will succeed, even when the competition is older and faster and just better and the filly does well enough. But so much of the time, she comes in second. And that's not good enough. It disappoints her mother, and the filly has so many ways of doing that as to make it a sport of its own. She retreats to her room, to the stories which don't question or judge her. She tries not to get caught crying and her mother loves her, the filly knows that. Sometimes, after a really bad game, her mother comes into the room and cradles the filly's head against warmth and softness. Sings to the filly, singing without true lyrics in the rising and falling croon which those flexible vocal cords can so easily provide. The filly loves being cuddled that way, and hates that the surest means of finding such comfort is through losing. Her mother loves her. But her mother pushes, all the time, and sometimes the filly feels as if a young back will break. Her mother loves her. Her father, she doesn't see much of her father, because her father is a stallion. A stallion is a colt who's grown up and the filly is not allowed to be among the colts unless adults are present. Colts are crude and angry and, far too often, stupid. Her mother doesn't seem to think stallions are much better. None of the mothers seem to think that, and so fillies are supervised closely whenever colts and stallions are about. They play separately. They are educated in facilities which exist on opposing sides of the gap. A society which has been segregated away from the humans has one more level of dividing line to inflict. The filly should have more friends among the other children, because her mother is among the strongest and that would normally invite a certain degree of formal approach. A society so confined has great need for formality, as there is nowhere for any true argument to go. But the filly is being pushed too hard. No one really likes playing with the one who's always being told to beat you, and the filly can never protest, can't say that she just wants to have fun without worrying about placement and recognition and honors. To be among others where her mother can see her, and that happens far too often, is to know the challenge will be coming. That she has to prove herself again, and nothing she does is ever enough proof. So the filly gallops back to her books, because then she can pretend she's studying. After all, it only takes seconds to swap one out with another book. Her mother respects studying, because fillies are supposed to be smart, while colts are stupid and it's traditional to study. There's a day where her mother catches her studying, or at least, that's what actually gets caught. Her mother is in a rare good mood, because the filly didn't come in second in the last race. It helped not to be going against older fillies for once. And her mother tells the filly that one day, maybe she can take up a duty of their species. To go among the humans and teach, because humans frankly need a little help. Her mother smiles, leaves, and, the filly doesn't try to retrieve the other book, the one with knights and valor and victory in it. She just stands there and looks out the window of the old house, because just about all the houses are old and her mother's line has lived in the same house for centuries. Anything new has to be brought in through connections and smuggling and double blinds. Every contact with the outside, even the necessary one, is a risk, and so such contacts are kept to a minimum. The herd has been hiding within the gap for centuries. The same gap. And for centuries, fillies whose mothers loved them said that the next generation would be the one which fulfilled the ancient duties. To be a teacher. To be a knight. To leave. The filly looks out the window, at the same old view, and realizes her grandam said that to her mother. Her mother just said it to her. She will say it to her own child, and nothing will ever change. And she runs. She bursts from the house, arm over her face so that none can see the tears streaming. She gallops through forest and clearings, and there is no square foot of soil which her hooves can pound against which thousands of the lost, the lied to didn't already touch before they were confined one final time within the cemetery. Since the moment of her birth, she has existed within a gap in the world. It's where she lives. It's where her kind might as well have always lived, and it is where every last one of them will die. She gallops through her prison, eventually collapses against a too familiar tree and cries herself out, at least for what will show. The inner weeping will continue for years to come. Eventually, she forces herself back to her hooves, goes to a stream, cleans her face before trotting back, because to be late for dinner will disappoint her mother. She trots for home and in dream, she believes that ancient house is the only one she will ever know. In dream, dark eyes watch her from a hidden place in the phantom woods. The younger watches the filly until the nightscape begins to shake, jolted by the force of the approaching wakening. And when she can stay no longer, she silently nods to herself before vanishing. The next judgment will wait for the day.